Pai nosso, que estás no céu, santificado seja o vosso nome. Venha a nós o vosso reino, seja feita a vossa vontade, assim na terra como no céu, assim na terra como no céu. O pão nosso de cada dia dai-nos hoje, ó Senhor. Perdoai as nossas dívidas, assim como perdoamos aos nossos devedores. Não deixeis cair em tentação, mas livrai-nos de todo o mal. Não deixeis cair em tentação, mas livrai-nos de todo o mal.
Dr. George Daher. But today we know that for us Spiritists, it's a very special day. It's the day that we celebrate the release of the Spirit's book in 1857. So it's a day that we once more would like to show our gratitude to Allan Kardec, to all the spirits that have worked with the work of the codification. So we are going to be starting with our opening prayer. Then I'm going to introduce Dr. Daher, and he will begin to say his talk to us. So let us raise our thoughts, asking the benefactors to help us, to assist us in this moment of struggle, and that we may gather from opportunities that we have, such as this one, the necessary knowledge and understanding to be able to cope with the difficulties of life, to find strength, resignation, and above all, hope. We ask for the blessings for all homes and for our guest speaker today, that through his message, we may feel the joy, the blessings of our Heavenly Creator and our brother Jesus. So Dr. George Daher today is going to be presenting to us the talk, Allan Kardec's Contribution to Science. He's an internal medicine and endocrinology specialist with a master in health science. He's also a reviewer for medical journals on health and spirituality and on diabetes, and manager of technical actions of the Institute of Behavioral Medicine Euripides Barçanufo, previously known as Spiritist Psychiatric Hospital. Dr. Daher is the secretary for the Brazilian Spiritist Medical Association and a physician on Goiás State Secretary of Health in the Department for the Assessment of Highly Complex Medicines. Dr. George Daher also authors chapters in medical and spiritist books. But we are very happy, very pleased to have George. Now I'm going to call him George here with us. And George, now it's with you, okay?
It's a great honor to be here with you, especially in this day, the day we send our gratitude feelings to Allan Kardec. the day of the Spiritist book, and it's wonderful. We'll try to talk about Allan Kardec'S methodology. Allan Kardec had teach us how to think in a logical manner when we are in front of the new. The spiritual world was the new to Allan Kardec, and he learned how to think and teach us how to think with the new. And he created a methodology, a special methodology, a scientific methodology. Then we will talk about this today. When we think about knowledge, initially we can consider knowledge as a prize to win at the end of a race, but knowledge, it's a collection of procedures. It's a process. You don't get the knowledge through the books you read. You don't get the knowledge through the lectures, but it's a process. It's an endless process. And Trujillo told to us about the kinds of knowledge. And he wrote that knowledge, you can reach knowledge through popular thoughts, popular knowledge, religious or theological, philosophical, and scientific knowledge. Then we have several types of knowledge. When we read Elia Prigogine, a chemical, a wonderful man, we know that the ways to obtain knowledge, we can obtain knowledge through science, philosophy, religion, art, and it's crazy, but through madness too. Well, thinking about how can I get knowledge through madness? When we see the art of Antonio Bispo. Antonio Bispo was a schizophrenic man in Brazil. He lived in a psychiatric hospital in Rio de Janeiro, and his art is wonderful. And he produced art when he was in the madness state, in the activity of disease. And I understand by this way what Prigogine wanted to tell to us when he considered the madness a way to obtain knowledge. The scientific knowledge is the kind of knowledge that we can talk about with more property. We can talk about with more security, because the scientific knowledge is built over criteria that tend to be universal or supposed to be universal. Then the scientific knowledge can be shared all the world for all people, but it has a limitation. To scientific knowledge, you must have a kind of preparation. You must go to a college, or you must be prepared to understand those criteria. Then scientific knowledge is generated by research, backed by a special methodology. Allan Kardec bring to us his methodology. And at the time of Allan Kardec, his methodology was revolutionary. His methodology used today in science. Elia Prigogine, in his book, Science in an Age of Transition, he says that since the 17th century, there were a theological view of the science. The theological view of the science was the model to Newtonian physics. And he proposed that in the Newtonian physics, there were complete symmetry between the past and the future. In this way of view the world, we don't need to distinguish the past from the future. This is a role almost equivalent of the role of God. Then the past and the future are symmetrics, complete symmetry. Then we can establish deterministic laws to the human knowledge, closer to the divine and atemporal, but also this kind of theological view have created the dualism that is still annoy the human experience. Then the old science or the Newtonian science, the Newtonian physics, created the dualism, and we have to manage the dualism in our day-to-day until now. In his book, Science in an Era of Transition, not in the Age of Transition, Prigogine talk about non-equilibrium physics. And I'll pass the slides and I'll try to explain. There are restrictions to prevent a system from reaching the equilibrium. He works with chemics. He's chemical. And he understands very well the reactions, the physics-chemicals reaction. A simple example is the ecosphere. Solar radiation prevents it from reaching the balance. The important point is that being far from the balance, there is no further guarantee that the driven system will return to its initial state. It's what Prigogine wrote in his book. On the contrary, the system begins to explore new structures and new species of space-time organizations, which Prigogine calls dissipative structures. One new coherence arises and leads, for example, to wave properties, such as those that are found in oscillatory chemical reactions. In this case, all molecules, they simultaneously become blue, and then they all become red, and so onwards. They are changing. They are far from the equilibrium. This is amazing because in order to change colors, you need to coherent process involving billions of particles. Prigogine usually describes this behavior saying that the matter close to equilibrium is blind, and each molecule can see only the neighbors far from the balance. However, you have long-range correlations essential in the construction of the new structures. The life would be impossible in the absence of this balancing process. Then now we can go further and classify the atomic or molecular figure that leads to such phenomena. Traditional physics was concentrating research on individual trajectories, or oscillatory functions in quantum theory. Now we arrive at the concept of populations. It's what wrote Prigogine. The trajectory populations acquire new properties. In this case, Again, the total is greater than the sum of the parts. It's the art, the level of population, that the distinction between the past and the future, the arrow of time. But now, the laws of nature no longer refer to certainties and yes, to possibilities. We changed the certain to possibility. Prigogine watched the world as assembly of possibilities. We don't have more the cause and effect as an individual, but as an individualized, but assembly of possibilities. According to Einstein, science was the way to escape history's misfortunes. Prigogine has a social view of the science. According to him, science is the way to build a world with less iniquities, less implicit violence, and at the same time, preserving the benefits for the population. And we have to understand that knowledge acquired by science is never absolute and complete. We can understand this in these days because every day, every hour, we receive new research about the coronavirus, and it's never the last word of the science. Knowledge acquired by science is not absolute. We must know this. When we talk about the role of religion in science, why am I talking about religion in the middle of the speech about science? Well, John C. Lennox, a senior professor in England, in his book, God's Undertaker, Has Science Buried God? He talked to us about the great question in science. He talked to us about the theists, the believers in God, and materialists. In 1999, the Scientific American magazine had published this research, and among the members of National Academy of Science in America, 72% were atheists. Only 7% of those scientists are God believers. Richard Swinburne is a theologue in England too. He developed a philosophy. In his philosophy, he developed a way to prove the God's existence through the way of philosophy and theology. And he wrote that I'm not postulating a God of the gaps, a God just to explain the things that science hasn't yet explained. I am postulating a God to explain why science explains. I don't deny that science explains, but I postulate God to explain why science explains. I brought Richard Swinburne and John C. Lennox because to understand the relationship between Allan Kardec and science, we must consider, we must remember every day, every minute, that Allan Kardec was theist. He had a belief in God. He believed in God. And he postulated that God was had no passive play in the world. Allan Kardec received from the spirits the teaching that all the universe, all that exists in universe, came from a trinity: God, the spirit, and matter. The Holy Trinity of Spiritism. Then, to understand Allan Kardec's role and contribution to science, we must remember that Allan Kardec put God in the role of science, playing the science. God interfered in the knowledge that we get through science according to Spiritism or to scientific Spiritism. When we perform a research using the Adobe Reader app, utilizing the full the term, using the full search mode, and using the term science with capital S, we have 211 occurrences in basic books and 523 occurrences in the Spiritist Review magazine. Then Allan Kardec, concerned with science. Science to him was important. And in the Gospel according to Spiritism, in the introduction, Allan Kardec tells to us that Spiritism provides the key to relationship between the soul and the body. We must remember the universe is composed by God, Spirit, and matter. And continuing with Allan Kardec, and proves that there is a constant reaction of one upon the other. Thus, it opens up a new pathway to science, and by showing the true cause of certain illness, it provides it with the means of combating them. Once science begins taking into account the spiritual element in the body's economy, it will fail less frequently. Science, the biomedical science, through the God believers scientists, are talking about the whole of spirituality, the role of spirituality in our economy, in our healthness. Nowadays, we have a lot of papers talking about this issue, or this subject, sorry. In his wonderful book, Genesis, Allan Kardec tells to us Spiritism and science complement each other. Thus, science without Spiritism finds itself in the powerless position of explaining certain phenomena by mere laws of matter. And Spiritism without science would lack support and verification control. But we have to understand that Allan Kardec was not proposing that Spiritism has to be or had to be the scientific in the way of ordinary science, in the way of the science of the matter. The subject of Spiritism is the spiritual laws, the spiritual world. Allan Kardec proposed that Spiritism use the same methodology or the same methods of science, official science, to verification control. Then we do not have to adapt Spiritism to the findings of the science. And the contrary is true also. We don't have to interpret all the findings of science with using the Spiritism, except at the point where the laws of matter necessarily implies in the action of the spiritual element. Allan Kardec in the Spiritist Review 165 in the page 41, the Spiritists will not move away from the truth and will have nothing to fear from the contradictory opinions, as long as its scientific theory and moral doctrine consists of scrupulous and consciously deduction of observed facts without prejudice or preconceived systems. Allan Kardec has the certainty that the scientific theory of Spiritism is bold, and the moral doctrine is the fundamental part of this building, the building we call Spiritism, the building of knowledge. As remembering, Herculano Pires in his book Theoretical Course, Theoretical Lesson of Spiritism, Theoretical Course of Spiritism, he remembered that the Spiritism is a theory of knowledge, not simply an epistemology, but it's more than this. It's not the way to acquire knowledge, but it's a bold knowledge. And with the Spiritism, we learn how to think and how to see the world. Well, continuing with Allan Kardec, he tells to us in the Spiritist Review, 1864, there is, however, a highly important consideration. It's the fact that the Spiritism did not follow the paths of hypothesis as it is accused. I did not suppose the existence of the spiritual world in order to explain the phenomena at hand. It followed the path of analysis and observations. Analysis and observation. From the facts, it was led to the cause, and the spiritual element was presented as an active force. The Spiritism, I repeat, changed completely the course of ideas by demonstrating, not by hypothesis, but by facts, the existence of the invisible world that waits for us. Then Allan Kardec is talking to us that he didn't work with hypotheses. He worked with facts. He received from all the world messages that came from the spirits. We can imagine the Allan Kardec table or Allan Kardec desktop without computer. How did manage all the documents we received? He received every day, every single day. The mailing of Allan Kardec was full of letters, full of documents he received every day. And he created his methodology and by analyzing all the papers that he received. In the Genesis, still in the Genesis, in the chapter 1, Allan Kardec teaches that Spiritism is a science of observation. Just as science, properly speaking, is concerned with the study of the laws that govern the material principle, the special object of Spiritism is the knowledge of the laws of the spiritual principle. Then we must understand that which concern to us is the laws of the spiritual principle. Now, since this later principle is one of the force of nature, which reacts incessantly on the material principle and vice versa, it follows that knowledge of one cannot be complete without the knowledge of the other. That Spiritism and science complement each other. We use the methodology of science to verification control of our research, our findings. But through this, we can, by analyzing the spiritist, the laws of the spiritual world, we can find constantly the interaction between the spiritual world and material world. The Trinity is continuously interacting: God, the Spirit, and matter. Allan Kardec had developed the universal control of spiritist teachings. It's a kind of concordance of the teachings received from several kinds of the spirits and mediums in all the world. And he took it as a way, a form of control, an important form of control, an important method of control. This universality of teachings of the spirits constitutes the strength of spiritism. The first control is undoubtedly that of reason to which one has to submit, without exception, everything that comes from the spirits. We must remember in the Spiritist Review magazine, 1858, Allan Kardec told to us about the teachings about reincarnation, the teachings of reincarnation that we received from the spirits. And he wrote that it was not because the spirits send the message or teach about reincarnation that I promptly accept this theory. I received it, I analyze it, and after criterious analysis, a criterious examination, I accepted because it was the more properly associated with justice, divine justice. Then Allan Kardec showed to us that it's not only receive the teachings from the spirits. You must use initially the reason, your thought. You must learn how to thought. You must learn how to use the reason. You must use your reason. Then, after this, Allan Kardec continues. Therefore, the best control is the agreement in the teaching of the spirits. But that still does need to occur in certain conditions. The only serious guarantee that there exists is in the agreement between spontaneous revelations made through mediums of a large number of mediums that are strange to one another and in several regions. Or, Allan Kardec is reinforcing the need to use the reason to compare the agreement of messages that we receive. His methodology is wonderful. His methodology is scientific, is used in our days in the science. Continuing in the Spiritist Review magazine, it's possible that the domination of science which we gave to Spiritism will be contested, and it was contested. That science would not have, without a doubt, and in any case, the characteristics of the exact science it's precisely in this aspect that those who intend to judge and experiment and are in error, as if they were dealing with a chemical analysis or a mathematical problem. Spiritism is different. Spiritism is not a laboratory discipline. Spiritism has moral consequences. Then we can talk about the contributions of Spiritism to science, especially in the applied science, the biomedical science. And we can talk about the problem of consciousness, the question of survival, and contribution to psychiatry. Then, talking about the problem of consciousness, we go to heaven and hell. And in the chapter 7, when Allan Kardec write about the flesh is weak. Nowadays, spiritualist philosophers fully realize that the areas of the brain corresponding to the various aptitudes owe their development to the activity of the spirit. And consequently, that is development. This development is an effect rather than a cause. We must remember that Allan Kardec make a great distinction between the spirit and body. The spirit is independent of body. It's not the same thing. It's not, the spirit is not a consequence of the body. And Allan Kardec had perceived that, realized that the spirit influences the body, but the spirit needs the body to his expression. And the Spirit's book, he teaches, although the instrument may be damaged, the spirit remains intact, and when freed from matter, regains full possession of its faculties. Nowadays, we have in the consciousness studies, the most of researchers, the most of philosophers, the most of men that publish about the problem of consciousness, they are atheists or agnostics. Those who are naturalists, they believe that the spirit is only the emergence of the brain function, or the spirit is an epiphenomenon of the cerebral functions. The most of them. Some of them that are maybe almost believers, they tell to us, oh, there is a continuum between spirit and mind and brain. The mind surges from the brain. This continuous is almost materialistic view. Allan Kardec teaches the consciousness is the expression of the spirit. The mind is the expression of the spirit. The mind uses the brain, uses the body when incarnated. When we are here on the earth, we use our bodies to the expression of the spirit. Allan Kardec do not deal with this trick, the continuum. The continuum is a trick. Because when you talk about the continuum, you are talking about an epiphenomenon of the mind as an epiphenomenon of the brain, or you are talking about the mind with no independence from the brain. And Allan Kardec, still in the Spiritist book, he teaches, do not mistake cause and effect. A spirit always possesses faculties that belong to it, but the organs do not provide the faculties. The faculties spur the development of the organs. It was, we were talking in the last slide. When it incarnates, a spirit already has certain characteristic predispositions. If we contend the existence of a special organ in the brain for each of these, the development of the cerebral organ is an effect, not a cause. If each of the faculties were a result of physical organs, humans would be mere machines with no free will and no responsibility for their actions. Then Allan Kardec is teaching us, is remembering us that we are moral beings. As spirits, we are moral beings. We have responsibility. We develop our free will with our moral evolution. And question 378, Allan Kardec asked to the spirits, how can the brain alteration act on the spirit after death? To me, it's an important question, because for almost 30 years, I was general physician of the psychiatric hospital, the INSEB, Institute of Behavioral Medicine, Euripides Barçanufo. And to me, in our obsession group is specialized in schizophrenia patients, because in our hospital, we received more than 10,000 patients with schizophrenia during his 70 years of existence. We are celebrating 70 years of life of the hospital, April 23. Then, since the beginning of my job there, I was concerned about how is the relationship between the brain of a schizophrenic patient and this patient as a spiritual being. And this is because this question is very, this question touched me in a special way. And Allan Kardec received the answer of this question. It's a memory that weighs heavily on a spirit. The spirit is not aware of all that took place due to insanity and needs a certain amount of time to recover. What we see here, and we will see in another slide, Allan Kardec is not attributing the madness to the spirit. Allan Kardec do not put that the cause of madness come from the spirit. In Brazil, in the decades, the 1930s, 1940s, we had the battle of madness, and the Brazilian physicians, those that were from academy, the psychiatric discipline, they considered spiritism as a factory of madness. Spiritism was accused to produce madness. And the reaction of the spiritists were the creation of a lot of hospitals with the purpose to show that spiritism can treat madness. But the result, and we have the results in we have clearly the results of Professor Dr. Inácio Ferreira in Uberaba. The results was that a great part of patients received, they were free from the disease or the madness after spiritist treatment. But a considerable part of those patients still remain with the mental disease. Or what we can conclude, that yes, there is obsession, but there is mental disease due to brain defects. In my personal experience, I have to control the time, but in my personal experience, we had evoked a great number of incarnated patients. We had success in several cases, and all the manifestations were not clear. The spirit of incarnated patient did not know what was happening. Then the knowledge that the brain can be altered and cause mental disease is a great point. Now, going to the contribution to psychiatry, Allan Kardec shows us that there's types of insanity. What we were talking about in this communication, the insane individual has two personalities, the one that is delirious and the one that is aware of its acts without being able to control them. Well, Pierre Juty, he suffered when in Earth by a mental disease. But I think that he had this kind of consciousness of this fact a long time after he was disincarnated. And in the Spirit's book, the predisposing cause of madness is to be found in the brain that renders it more or less susceptible to certain impressions. When the predisposition to insanity exists, its manifestation takes on the character of the pursuit, which forms a fixed idea. Allan Kardec is talking to us. The development of the brain depends on several factors. Nutritional factors, familial factors, genetic factors, and we can receive these factors, and we can imprint in our brains all these factors. Then we constitute the predispositions. We could not live to talk about the genetics. Then the predispositions can exist before the brain be affected by a disease. Then, when we read in the Gospel according to Spiritism, in fact, it's certain that most cases of insanity are due to the troubles produced by the vicissitudes that people do not have the strength to bear. What kind of problems? All the problems that we have when we are incarnated. We have always to remember that our life in earth is marked by the suffering. We are in a planet of expiation, and the proofs we have we are walking to regeneration, to regenerate our planet, ourselves, but we are still inferior spirits. We are still in a planet where suffering is present since our delivery from the womb. The little child that is leaving the comfort of the womb suffer the cold, the contraction of the uterus, suffer the new environment where she or he is expelled to. Then the suffering is our great fellow, is our great buddy in our planet. Then the vicissitudes maybe is the most cases of insanity. And Allan Kardec asked to the spirits, when a person is insane, what is the state of that individual's spirit? The answer is long, but Allan Kardec received it. When a spirit is free, it receives impressions directly and directly exerts its action on matter as well. When a spirit incarnates, it's in an entirely different condition and is required to act only through the designed organs. In some of all those organs are impaired. If some of all those organs are impaired, its actions or impressions concerning those organs are interrupted. Individuals beset by such impairments become blind if they lose their eyes, deaf if they lose their ears, and so on. Imagine now that the organ responsible for manifestations of intelligence and will is partly or entirely impaired, and you will easily understand that the use of such an incomplete or distorted organ will provoke a functional distress that the spirit is fully conscious of but unable to control. Here, Allan Kardec is talking to us about the interaction spirit body spirit. The interference of the body is important. If I am a great musician and I receive the major instrument, I will not produce a good music. The contrary is true. If I a horrible musician and I receive a Stradivarius violin, I will not produce a good music too. But the defect is in the musician, not in the instrument. But when we talk about the disease and mental disease, the insanity, and at the time of Allan Kardec, a problem that was very important was cretinism, especially in Swiss, because the altitude. And he wrote some tests about cretinism, the deficiency of iodine. It's an organ that is damaged. The brain is damaged because the environmental factor, and the spirit cannot do anything. And complementing then it's always the body, not the spirit, that is dysfunctional. And Allan Kardec received the answer, yes, but remember that just as a spirit acts upon matter, matter in turn reacts upon the spirit, at least to a certain extent, due to the altered state of its receptor organs. The spirit may temporarily receive various impressions. When the insanity continues for long periods of time, the repetition of the same acts may exercise a permanent influence of a spirit. It only ends when it's complete separation from all material impression. And I can confess to you our experience with working in a spirit in obsession in our hospital with patients with schizophrenia. A considerable number of the spirits that manifest, they are still with the disease. In a certain occasion, through projection of the soul, I could talk to a patient. His name was Justino. He was out of body too. And I asked it to him, and now, Justino, hey there, how are you? And he was astonished, and he told to me, I don't know what is happening. I'm still confused. And after this, in our talking, he began to produce his usual hallucinations. It was an interesting experience, not reproducible. Allan Kardec, in the Medium's book, he proposed a theory for hallucination. And his theory of hallucination, he told that the spirit, he can see through his soul, the patient then, through his soul, the images that are printed in his brain. Then Allan Kardec wrote, therefore the image transmitted to the brain by the eyes leave the impression on it, which enables one to remember a picture as if it were still present. Thus, the soul really sees, but it only sees a photographic image in the brain. What Allan Kardec is talking to us, that the hallucinations that we see in psychiatric patients are real, a real visualization, a real vision of what is imprinted in the brain. But who sees the spirit? Then we talk about the serious case of subjugation, corporeal subjugation. Allan Kardec asked in the Medium's book, the question number 221. If it develops further, can corporeal subjugation lead to insanity? And the answer is yes. And the spirits put to us a challenge when they talk. When doctors understand the spiritualism sufficiently, they will know how to make the distinction and will heal a larger number of ill persons than they do with their present techniques. We have a lot of new drugs. We have a lot of new techniques. But the difficult cases of obsession, the the worst obsession, the corporeal subjugation. The drugs will not work so well. The techniques will not work so well. And Spiritism has the key to relieve this kind of suffering. Then Allan Kardec, when talking in what is Spiritism, he teaches that obsessive subjugation, which is used to be called possession, is a physical coercion exerted by spirits of the worst kind, and it can even neutralize the obsessed free will. Can you imagine your free will be neutralized, completely neutralized? You are conducted, you are following only the will of the subjugator. It's a difficult case. And Allan Kardec remembers this state differs essentially from pathological insanity, with which is wrongly confused, because in obsessive subjugation there is no organic lesion. Since the cause is different, the curative measures must also be different. Our thoughts do not need to cloak the words to be understood by the spirits. It's what we read in the medium's book. The spirits can read our thoughts. We don't need the words to think. Our thoughts are projected outside our spirit, in our psychosphere, in a kind of emotions, in a kind of images, in a kind of sounds, and the spirits can read it. All evoked spirits can perceive them due to their intellectual faculties. We just have to direct our thoughts to them. We use this kind of communication among our colleagues, our family, our relationship of our day by day. Because when we talk, we are talking now. We are projecting thoughts. We are projecting images. We are projecting a kind of wave that is assimilated by the other spirits with we are in tune. Then, when we are talking about our mental sanity, our mental health, we must have health thoughts. Then I think that it's the last one, and I'd like to remember that the aim of the words is to remember that in the Spiritism, our science depends on God. Our science have the God as a player. The God is not only the one that had created and go away. A lot of people just repeat, "Oh, God is the primary cause of the universe." But what's the role of God in your life? "Oh, my life is ruled by science." What's the role of God in science? I don't know. Our life should be ruled by the God's law. Allan Kardec realized it very soon. Allan Kardec realized that God produces miracles every day in our life. He realized the presence of God, and he reported it in the wonderful book, Genesis, the Genesis. And the first chapters are wonderful, are very philosophical, but are wonderful. We can understand what is the spiritist science, what's the contribution of Allan Kardec to science. I'd like to thank you, all of you, for the presence. I'd like to thank Jussara for the invitation, João, my media trainer, Daniel in the background, my friend, and it was very nice to be with you today.
Jorge, thank you so much for all the things that you brought to us today. It gave us a lot to think about, especially today, again, that we are celebrating 163 years of the Spirit's book, of official appearance of Spiritism. It is so good for us to remember the precious teachings we have on the books of the codification, like you mentioned, the Spirit's book, the Gospel according to Spiritism, the Medium's book, Heaven and Hell and Genesis, the 5 of them, plus the Spiritist Review. Kardec brought to us so much knowledge, so many things. And like you said before, it is really, truly a shame that especially at his time, belonging to the Academy of Science, people were not even open to listen to what he had to say. The preconceived ideas prevent them to be open at least to hear Kardec, that should be taken into consideration, especially being a colleague at the same, academic life, but unfortunately until today we still see this kind of behavior in science. I can only imagine that with everything that we are going through even now, science being completely not knowing what to do with everything that is happening. I'm sure a lot of scientists and doctors are now praying to God, please shed a light so that we can find a solution to all these problems that we are living now. And also in terms of, the knowledge also, and the expanding our understanding in terms of insanity, and how the spirit is actually the one that is responsible for everything. There are so many people that wants to blame the flesh, right? The flesh is weak, presented, but actually it's still our spirit that has to be tamed, that has to understand its purpose. I also would like to mention that this week the Spiritist group of New York also celebrated 19 years of existence here in the
heart. Congratulations.
In the heart of New York, has been the first group that has been presenting Spiritism in English here in New York. And so we have so many things to celebrate. But above all, thank you so much, Jorge, for all your considerations, for all that you brought to us today. And I understand, like we were saying before we start, how hard it is to give a talk in a language that is not our native language, but it was so good, and you helped it so much in terms of us also to overcome this kind of barrier in terms of language, because at the end what is really important is the messages, the teachings, the knowledge that you bring. Would you like to say anything else before we go to our closing?
No, it's an honor to be here with you, and I'm seeing here that Ana Rosa has a question.
Okay. If you want to ask, a discarnate spirit can continue to be schizophrenic in the spiritual realm and make or subjugate an incantant spirit to behave as a schizophrenic? It's a very complex question, so she wants to know. Right?
In our experience, this does not occur. in our experience in the hospital, all the patients have the behavior of a schizophrenic patient, and the diagnostic of schizophrenia was based on the DSM criteria, and we don't see it. But the patient after that, he can suffer for a time, suffering the hallucinations, the delusions, and the mental disease. But after a period of rest and the help, with the help of good spirits, I think they can recover the mental health.
Okay. So thank you so much, Ana Rosa, for sending the question. It's a very complex question, but yeah, we have so much to learn about all these connections with the spirit world, right? That's why I think spirit has shed so much light. First of all, demonstrating to us that life goes on and that the spirits continue feeling the same way they felt before, and they will bring to the spirit realm also some of the disturbances they have, but like Dr. George just explained to us, not necessarily things that pertain more to the physical body, and because then the physical body is behind. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We had people from all over the US. We had people from the UK. Elsa Rossi was following here with us as well. Thank you, Elsa, for being with us today as well. And Rejane from Austria was here too, and so many people, and friends from Brazil. And again, this talk is going to be in our YouTube channel, so you can watch again or ask your friends to go and watch this talk as well. So thank you so much. Let us just again elevate our thoughts in gratitude for what we have received, for the blessings, especially the one that we have received in this incarnation, the awakening of our souls to spiritual values. May we truly bless and recognize this opportunity, and maybe we be able to give our best to follow these teachings, to be guided by all the lessons that Jesus brought to us. And in this difficult time, we may be there for everyone that is in need and there is lost, and that has lost hope and faith. May the good spirits be with us, each one of us, blessing us and blessing our homes. Amen. So next week we will be here again at 11 a.m. with Dr. Vicente Pessoa. So don't miss it. It's going to be a wonderful opportunity as well. He's going to be talking about the scientific aspects of forgiveness and how much forgiveness can actually help us to be in a better emotional and physical and spiritual health. So I'll see you there. Until next week.